Great. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be able to have a conversation with Greg. Greg is the consummate entrepreneur. Started his first business when he was 14 years old. He was making websites for the local newspaper and for drug trial companies. And then he started his first podcast in 2005, which I think was before the word podcast was invented. And on that podcast, he interviewed people like Reid Hoffman, when Reid had about 50 employees from LinkedIn, the founder of Yelp, and the founder of Vanguard. And then he went on to start Muck Rack. And he's grown Muck Rack to 50 million in ARR, totally bootstrapped. Muck Rack today has over 250 employees. And it provides a software solution for PR executives. And the mission of the company is to transform the relationships between PR executives and the media and to generate relationships of trust. The company's grown over the last 3 years by 338%. It's tripled the employee headcount. So I'm very excited to be here with Greg and for Greg to tell us a little about the journey. And so really just start off and tell us how did you become an entrepreneur? How did you found Muck Rack?
Sure. So I got started, as you mentioned, early age, 14. I always loved creating companies, building companies. And when I was finishing up college back in 2005, I was getting stuck in, I was in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. I kept getting stuck in traffic, and I hated Atlanta radio. So it was just when the iPod had come out, and I had this idea, like, what if we could download audio to the podcast and or download audio to the iPod that's spoken word rather than just music. At the time, that was a new idea. I saw there was this new thing called RSS feeds with enclosures, which later got dubbed podcasting from the iPod. Nobody thought the word would stick because everyone thought Apple was going to sue everyone out of existence, but obviously it stuck. And I had this idea to launch a podcast and interview entrepreneurs, which now is an extremely common format in podcasting, but back in 2005, no one had ever done it. So among the people that I interviewed was Ev Williams, who was working on a startup called Odeo. And Odeo, if you've never heard of it, it's because it didn't work. It itself was a podcasting company. So I watched Ev pivot from Odeo to a little side project called Twitter. And that led me to sign up to Twitter really early. I got my first name on there, so I'm just @Gregory on Twitter, just because I was the first Gregory to sign up for it. And then from doing the shorty, or from doing that podcast and being on Twitter really early, I had this idea. We could launch a site where we could find the best people on social media by voting with a tweet, which again now is a very common idea, but no one had ever let someone vote with a tweet back in, this was 2008. So launched the Shorty Awards back in 2008. Got a little timeline here, if they can switch to showing the slides on screen.
Slides.
If you could put the slide.
And
Great.
Also the timer. You've got to click again.
Oh, yeah. So I think we got it now. So you can see back in 2008, launched this award show for Best of Social Media. And then after seeing how well that did, it went viral within 24 hours. It was a top trending term on social. I saw lots of journalists covered this award show, the Shorty Awards. So that led to the idea to launch a site where, first ever site, we could see all the journalists in one place and what they were doing on social media. So we launched Muck Rack, the first version of it, back in 2009 as the first site where you could see all the journalists on social in one place. And then it took off with journalists. Originally, we had no business model. So it's just and we built it in 2 weeks. And my philosophy with business is always, if you can build and launch your business in under a month and for under a couple grand, just do it and figure out the business model later. Because if it doesn't work, you can always scrap it and try something else. So we launched Muck Rack. It became very popular with journalists. We had over 10,000 journalists request to get listed in that first year. And then very quickly after that, being in New York at the time, I'd run into all these PR people they tell me they're using our free site to do their job, to find the right journals to pitch. And that made me realize, like, oh, wait, we have this whole profession using our free website to do their job. We have all the data that they need. The one thing we don't have is a business model, and we didn't build tools for that purpose. So we chatted with lots of these PR people. We figured out what they need. And then in 2011, we relaunched Muck Rack, rebuilt it from the ground up as a SaaS platform. We keep it free for journalists, and we go to corporate PR teams, be it Fortune 500 companies or startups, as well as PR agencies, and give them this SaaS platform that helps them do their job and be successful.
So it took a few years to get to $1 million in ARR. I think that's really the toughest stage. How did you keep going? How did you not give up?
Yeah, so it was like a long toil. As you can see, we titled this The Overnight Success Story, and it only took a decade from pivoting to SaaS, or a dozen years if you include the years that it was free. And it was a slow growth, and we actually used the Shorty Awards, which were profitable from the beginning, to kind of fund the early days of Muck Rack, the SaaS platform. And when we launched, I think in that first month, we got maybe, 8,000 in MRR, so barely enough to pay for one person. And it was a couple of us working on it at the beginning. So there were a lot of years of just like a handful of us, first 2, then 3, then 4, running this entire SaaS business. I remember the customer support phone number used to just forward to my cell phone. I remember I was walking to work. We had some customer call up, and I picked up. I said, "Hi, this is Greg," and he's complaining about something. And then he was like, "Hey, I've had enough. Can I speak to your manager?" And I had to kind of say in this embarrassing way, "I'm actually the CEO and founder." He was like, "Oh, okay," and then we worked through it. So it was just a lot of kind of toiling with it, but. And the hard part too, early days in SaaS, is it takes so much longer to get to scale with SaaS, especially if you're a small ACV, which we were at the beginning. We went up market later. But when we started, it was like, as low as $99 a month, and someone could just sign up with a credit card. So the challenge is really like, in those early days, it takes so long to get to any kind of scale. And my co-founder, Lee Semmel, and I were watching friends of ours who launched agencies. With an agency in a year, you get to $1 million in revenue and start paying yourself decently. So it was just like all this toil, but largely from doing my podcast, I'd seen these other entrepreneurs really scale these SaaS businesses, and no one even called it SaaS back then, but it was just subscription revenue or reoccurring revenue. I was like, oh my God, if we could know exactly what we'd make every month and it was a sizable amount, it'd be an awesome business. So just kept at it. And the other thing was too, meeting with customers. We'd try to meet with as many customers as we can, and I just found it so motivating to sit down with a customer who loved our software, and then it just really inspired us to go back and keep building more and more. Right.
Do you think the same opportunities exist today for entrepreneurs as existed in 2009?
I think the opportunities are always there. Like when we started Muck Rack in 2009, we had a couple legacy competitors. And we started as a point solution, and we actually originally positioned ourselves, I didn't know anything about this market. Like I said, we kind of fell into it. So I assumed the legacy competitors were serving the customers well. And we positioned Muck Rack originally as this point solution. We even had an FAQ on our site where don't cancel the legacy competitors. We don't compete with them. Just buy us in addition. We're cheap. We do a couple things they don't do. And that'll be that. So I didn't think this opportunity was there. And at the beginning, we were like, hey, we'll be happy if Muck Rack could make, 20 grand a month, and then we could pay ourselves well, and then we'll figure out some other big opportunity. But then when we started talking to the customers, they were like, hey, we really don't like the legacy competitors. I wish you'd add this piece of functionality and that piece of functionality and that piece of functionality, and then we could just switch totally to you. So we kind of realized the opportunity by being in market. We didn't know this big of opportunity existed before we entered the market. So I think that element exists in lots of different industries where it might seem like there's some really formidable incumbent in an industry, but you don't know. They could have been asleep at the wheel. Maybe they got acquired by a bigger company that that's taken the focus off that market now, or maybe they're now going to pivot to some other market to get bigger and forget the market that got them there. So business is always dynamic. I think there's always opportunity out there.
Right. Right. One of my entrepreneurs says you should choose, when you start a business, you should choose your competitors. Like, choose a bad competitor. Don't choose, that's a good market. You chose to bootstrap. You're in New York. All of your friends are getting venture financing. There's tons of funds. A lot of your friends work in those funds. Why did you choose to bootstrap?
Yeah, so I got to, one of my bootstrapping tactics was always to go to my friends who'd raised venture capital and had really nice offices and ask if they'd give me a good deal on subletting from them. So we did that. For about a decade, we were subletting from venture-backed companies, and they had free sodas and coffee and snacks that they'd even let us access. So we're venture funded only in that way, that we got to eat the venture-backed food for free, but we never gave any equity to them. But I'd watch them, and I'd be like, hey, you want to go out for a drink? They're like, I can't do anything because I have a board meeting coming up this week, so I got to spend a week before the board meeting getting my 5 different venture capitalists on my board aligned, because they all have different interests and different ideas for what we should do. And then the week after, I've got to spend dealing with the fallout of whatever stupid idea one of them threw out at the board meeting. I've now got to find a way to show them that that won't work. And a lot of them had to do it monthly, at these early stage venture-backed companies. So I was always thinking, like, hey, what if we just took all the time? And we seriously thought about raising venture a few times early on, because when we proved that it started to work, I mean, we could have definitely grown faster with venture early on. I'd say maybe until we got to like 5 or 10 million. There was always like, if you gave me another $1, there was some screaming issue in the business that really needed help. But I would always think about, like, okay, I'm going to have to spend 3 months doing nothing but talking to venture capitalists. So I thought, what if I just spent those 3 months talking to customers and trying to get more business and grow the revenue stream? Then at the end of that, we'll have more cash from the customers. We won't have any dilution, and the business would be worth more. And I always just went through that calculus in my head. It always felt right to keep focusing on that. Also, I knew kind of the misalignment of interest. Again, I didn't know how big the business was. Like now, we're at a venture scale where it would have been an awesome venture outcome. But I wasn't sure the scale of it. And I had also heard horror stories from friends of mine where, like, they have a business that taps out at 10 million ARR. And it should be awesome, because, right, if you have a 10 million ARR business, you run at a 20% margin, you can take home 2 million every year. Like, that's not a failure. But I have friends who ended up in that situation. They had venture capitalists on the board, and the venture capitalists were like, well, you can't take the 2 million out. We really just need to see some kind of exit so we can go raise our next fund. So they kind of get stuck with what should have been an awesome business, and instead, it's this kind of albatross that they can't move forward from.
Right. Well, so a lot of people in the audience are hitting you saying, wow, that's great, but how do you do that? How do you bootstrap? How do you keep the costs down for 10 years, basically? What are the tips for people that say, yeah, I'd love that, but I don't know how to keep my head above water?
Yeah, well, the really easy thing when you're bootstrapped is you just can't spend more than you're making. Everyone now is like, oh, how do I be profitable? Because I've been, a venture-backed company and spending 3 times what I make. But there's just this discipline where I remember I had this spreadsheet. Most stressful time of my month every month was this spreadsheet that was my cash flow forecast. I never looked at revenue. I never looked at GAAP-based revenue or EBITDA, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, if you have a month where you have, more revenue than expenses on a GAAP measure. It just matters, do you have more cash coming in than cash going out? So for the first, I'd say up until 10 million ARR, all I cared about was cash flow. I tried not to even remember what EBITDA stood for. And I would always just have this cash forecast showing when the cash comes in and when it goes out, and just making sure that we never ran down to maybe more, having less than like 2 to 3 months worth of expenses in the bank. And sometimes I violated that rule when I was pushing it harder. But I would just focus on that. I really trained the team, whenever people would ask for money or budget to do something, answer was always no, and they'd have to come back to me at least 3 or 4 times to try to get the budget. I mean, when we would travel for conferences, and my HR department would never allow this now, but it'd be 2 to 3 of us sharing a hotel room, just taking the Uber X before that, back when it was really cheap. So we'd kind of use every trick in the book to keep expenses down. When we finally had a CFO join us, that was around like 10 million ARR. He was joking that usually when a CFO comes in, their job is to keep expenses down. They come in, they're like, oh, there's all this undisciplined spending. I'm gonna stop it. And when he came in, he was shocked that no one would come to him for money, because I trained the team so well that you're gonna get such pushback if you ask for budget that they stopped doing it. That he had to do the opposite. He had to go to them and say, hey, where could we invest money to grow faster?
Right. Where does the name come from, Muck Rack? I don't know if it translates in Ireland or the UK. So where's the name come from?
Yeah, this is after we launched. This is another thing when you start up really quickly, you don't do any market research. This is the term known in the US, but probably not known outside of it. And I put together a couple of slides to make it clear. So it first got popularized by Teddy Roosevelt. There were all these investigative journalists around the turn of the century in the progressive era in the U.S., around the 1920s, like Ida B. Wells and Julius Chambers and Nellie Bly. Nellie Bly even went undercover in an insane asylum to show how many abuses were going on there. And so Teddy Roosevelt coined them muck rakers. Originally kind of as a derogatory term, like, hey, they're digging through the muck, they're digging through the mud to find these stories on us. But over the years, journalists really loved the term because it showed that they were actually investigating and getting real stories, not just regurgitating what politicians or companies told them. So here we are sitting around in 2009. And we were thinking okay, we have muck rakers is this term that journalists like, and we're doing a site about journalism. And we thought, well, we're going to put all the journalists and all the news in one place. So we had this idea of a newspaper rack or a magazine rack. And then going back to the bootstrapping idea, the big limiting function was our $8 branding budget, which is exactly what it cost to buy an open domain name on GoDaddy at the time. And so we put all that together and got Muck Rack, and that's been our name ever since.
Right. So fast forward, build the business, get to 50 million in ARR without taking any funding, and at that point you take funding. Why do you take funding then, and how has that changed your life for good and for bad?
Yeah, it's been all evil. No, it's been great. Yeah, it's been great. So last year, we'd gotten to scale. By last year, we got to about 50 million in ARR. So, significant scale. Last year was over 200 people. We're quite a bit bigger now, and we're still growing profitably. We kind of reached this crossroads. We're like, OK, we're at scale. We had lots of offers to sell the whole business. But we were thinking OK, well, what do we really want to do here? And my co-founder and I own the vast majority of the company still going into last year. And we were thinking OK, do we just sell the whole thing and we'd have enough money to be set? Or, do we keep going and go bigger? I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs who'd sold their company, and most of them get really bored very quickly and kind of aimless in life, and they just end up going back to start another company. So I was thinking, you know what? Let's just go big and see how. We feel like the market's there. We think we can get the business to be 10 times the size it is now, and grow the market. And it's an exciting thing. The news is always changing, and we're kind of at the forefront of how these companies interact with the news. So we thought, hey, let's go really big with this company and kind of keep growing it to the next scale. And we had Susquehanna. It actually been courting us for quite a while. You all invited me to some of your past CEO summits and got to know that. I also have to say, part of why I avoided taking money was all the horror stories I said about venture capital at the early stage, and then talking to entrepreneurs who'd done these similar deals later in the company life cycle, after they're profitable, after they're at scale, that having a partner is very different because you're no longer dependent on them like you are when you know you need more money. So if you do a deal when you're unprofitable, no matter what you put in the term sheet, you kind of have a boss because you know you're going to need to go back to them for more cash. But once you're profitable, it totally changes the dynamic, and that the company's working already. It's not going to be kind of a boss relationship anymore. And in addition to that, it's clear, like at scale, you have a management team, you know what you're doing, the company has a vision. It's not like the early days where, hey, you're going to pivot every 6 months and you might disagree with the venture capitalist on which way you're pivoting. So I got a lot more comfortable with it after talking to more and more other entrepreneurs. So really, we didn't have to do it, but I figured, this opportunity's there. We'll get a healthy valuation. My co-founder and I are still the majority owners of the company and still in control. So we figured, hey, let's do it. We'll have a partner, and we can use it to get a little more support in terms of going really big and figuring out how we 10x the business again.
Okay, great. And it's been all joy since then, right? I'm just trying to think. That next slide, I can't remember what you were.
Oh, yeah. I put up the one from going on Cheddar News when we made the announcement.
Okay, good.
And it was funny because a lot of people didn't realize how big we were. And probably a lot of you feel this way if you're bootstrapping. It's like this kind of really quiet toil. Because if you raise $1 million in venture capital, you're covering TechCrunch, you get all this PR, everyone's congratulating you. You get to $1 million in ARR, nobody knows. And getting to $1 million in ARR, it's like such a bigger accomplishment than raising $1 million, because now you actually have a business that's probably worth 5 or 10 million. If it's a healthy business, and you're not diluted, unlike that person who raised $1 million, but you get no press or no credit for it. So it's this very perverse celebration incentive. So when we finally did this, it was kind of fun to finally get the kudos after getting to a bigger scale. But I'm really glad we didn't do it sooner, and you have to remember to celebrate along the way, and even if you don't get the press for getting to $1 million or 10 million in ARR, make sure you throw a nice party for your team and your friends.
So this past year, you brought on external CRO and external CMO. What did you learn in that process? How do you know when it's the right time to do that?
Yeah, so as we really scaled up, there's always this tension between promoting internally and bringing in external people, and I think it's a healthy tension, and I think you want to do a bit of both. I'm really proud to say in both cases, our prior head of sales and our prior head of marketing are still at the company and still working and still have bigger jobs now, way bigger jobs now than when they joined the company. But we saw that, at this scale, and you have 250 people, there's a lot more complexity. And there's a lot of stuff I don't even know. Like, I couldn't coach anyone at my company to do what my CRO now does. He knows a lot more about this than me. And my current CMO, I mean, they're both much more experienced than me and have spent more years in business than me. So we realized it was time to bring in external people. One thing I will say, before we had a partner who started working with Susquehanna, it was a lot harder to convince executives to join, because they'd all be like, oh, you haven't raised money. Is this some kind of lifestyle business? Or are you just going to be playing on the beach and my equity's never going to be worth anything? And we did give people equity or equity equivalent prior to this, but we were very skeptical of it. So I had to spend so much time in the hiring process convincing them that, hey, this isn't some weird little lifestyle business, and that, yes, we're taking this seriously. And we kind of had a chip on our shoulder. We wanted to show we're operating this business just as professionally, if not more, as a venture-backed business, even though we're not venture-backed. But it took a lot of work. And since doing the deal, now when I go to recruit executives, I get to skip all that. They just read in the paper or Google us, and they say, oh, you raised 180 million Series A from Susquehanna. They don't even bring it up. So it has made the hiring process a lot easier.
Great. Finally, bunch of SaaS entrepreneurs out there that want to get good PR for their companies. What's your tip for them? How do they get the best PR?
aside from signing up for Muck Rack.
Yeah, obviously they sign up for Muck Rack, the free version at first. And then
We're happy to help. But I think the big thing is just take a step back, and either if you have a PR person you know, a PR professional, or a friend or a journalist, like figure out what's newsworthy about your story. The hardest thing as an entrepreneur is we all think everything we do is amazing, and the second we launch it should be on the front page of the New York Times. But in reality, probably exactly just saying, hey, we launched a great company, everybody's got that story. So you got to figure out what's the hook with our business, how is what we're doing related to some bigger stories, some big trend in the news, and frame it that way. And I'm happy to help anyone out who needs it.
Great. Thanks very much for sharing. It's great chatting.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it.